I'm just a simple guy. I started keeping koi 20 odd years back. Similar to the story that you related. Just became a passion and became interesting, and it's something I pursued. I'm a scientist by profession, and I've done a lot of work over those 20 years on various aspects of koi. I developed my first product while I was working at AECI, which had to do with koi medicines, and from then on I haven't stopped looking at all the different types of technology associated with koi and water. Now I must say I'm terribly privileged to be here because there are some real stalwarts here. Chris is here, Neville is here, Larry is here, and I'm sure there are others. The guys from WCB are here. So there's a lot of knowledge around the table that perhaps exceeds my base of knowledge. Okay, but I'll share what I have and let you know what you need to know if I do know. Otherwise, I'll refer to some of the other experts in the room. So I've said to Kevin that, listen, the whole idea is for you to ask what you want to know. I don't have a story to tell except that about who I am and what I've been involved in. I used to be, I'm not anymore, a ZNA certified judge. So if you have any appreciation questions, you're also welcome to ask, and so was Larry, so he'll be able to answer some of that. So I can deal with biology, I can deal with nature, I can deal with bacteriology, I can deal with water chemistry, and I can deal with some points of appreciation. So there you go, the floor is open. Let it happen. Yes?
Corresponding with a guy, Sid Mitchell in the UK.
Right, I don't know him.
We were discussing nitrates.
Nitrates, right?
And how to get rid of them out of the pond. Because apparently the Japanese say your nitrates must be zero if possible, because it affects the skin quality of koi. So we always say the nitrates must be so low, but how do we get it low?
Okay.
Ammonia is fine, nitrates, etc. But to get rid of the nitrates out of the water.
Okay. So that's an interesting question. Now you're forcing me to use the board. So the first thing to understand, and please tell me if this bores you, because then I won't do it again. I'll do it another way. Okay. But what you basically have is the first product out of the or byproduct out of the fish. Sorry guys, you can't see, but I'll explain. Okay. So the first thing is that you get ammonia excretion. All right, and what ammonia converts to is nitrite, okay, and then you get nitrate. See, now I'm proving that I'm a chemist, but actually I'm not. Okay, so what happens is you get those three ions, and this reaction can also run backwards like that, okay, back to nitrite and then to gaseous nitrogen. All right, so if you can just picture that in your head, don't worry about the fancy symbols. All right, this process here is called nitrification, sorry. And guys, I'm not perfect, so please correct me if I'm wrong. This is nitrification, and this backward process here is called denitrification. So you would have heard of these things in the books and from talking to people, all right? And that's the mechanism of how you're supposed to remove nitrogen, okay, as a species from water. So traditionally, this used to be done by what they call the denitrifying bacteria. Okay, and that was the belief, and it's a very traditional belief that's very old, and it's true, okay? So quite often you'll find some of the people that have built ponds 20, 30 years ago, and even some of the shop guys will tell you that they used to sell a pouch of denitrifying bacteria, or what they call nitrate-producing bacteria, okay? Since then, the technology's moved on, and we don't use those bacteria. They are what we call chemolithotrophs or autotrophs. Basically, they work with converting chemical species, all right? We now use heterotrophs. And what are heterotrophs basically is they are fastidious bacteria. They eat very fast and they do things very fast. So if you look at a molecular level, okay, the nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria are far more efficient at doing this conversion, but they're in your pond at such small numbers, okay, that they actually don't do a good job. Okay, and traditionally, guys that have ponds that for the last 15, 20 years will tell you that it always used to topple over. Okay, so if you speak to some of the older guys, Chris will bear me out, it topples over at the sneeze. Okay, and then suddenly everything, obviously the ammonia goes out, the nitrite goes up, and this is the problem you have. But the heterotrophic bacteria actually are less efficient at doing this per cell. But because there are so many millions of cells in the system, they are far more efficient than the denitrifying bacteria. Okay, so So that is why the technology has moved on. Chris, I'm going to get to your answer. I'm going to get your answer just now. But that is why the technology has moved on, and that's the basis of why you can get a much better reaction. Okay? And the most recent publications over the last 8 to 10 years talk about heterotrophs being able to do both reactions. Okay, so anybody familiar with a sewage treatment plant or something like that, you'll understand that you have the system which we call the activated sludge system, which is the aerobic system, and then further downstream you have effectively what is the denitrification and the trickle showers, etc. taking place. They're two separate stages. The heterotrophs can do this interactively. All right, so Larry is one of the guys that works with the heterotrophic bacteria, and then there are other people that do that as well, okay? And that's why those products are so efficient at doing this reaction, all right? Not because they are nitrifiers, they're actually not, okay, or denitrifiers. So what happens is the fish excretes ammonia, okay, and then you get a transient buildup of nitrite. So half the time you don't measure it. If you do measure it, you know you've got a serious problem. Okay, because what happens is this accumulation inhibits this reaction from taking place. You've got a serious problem if you measure that. But most koi keepers won't measure this. All right? And then that nitrification reaction carries on to nitrate. All right? And now you're stuck with this in your koi pond. And that's the question Chris is asking. What happens here? All right? The heterotrophic bacteria take some of that back to nitrite and to gaseous nitrogen. All right? That's why you'll find that if you use some of these products, you will find that this reaction is taking happening a lot better, and that's actually not going so high. And I did a lot of this work in the early days with Percy Mitchell, where we looked at that reaction. Now, the truth be told, what Chris is talking about is, why do you need to reduce this? 100 ppm is okay. Okay, ppm is milligram per liter. For those of you that have a test kit that measures in milligram per liter, why do you need to reduce this? Okay. It's not actually toxic to the fish, Chris, you're right, okay? But it changes the aesthetic quality of the fish. So if you have a normal garden pond, don't worry about this reaction too much unless this starts exceeding 200 to 300 ppm. But I guess there's all connoisseur koi keepers here, okay, who show their fish, and then you have to worry about the nitrate concentration. Okay. From my experience, and we've done work in this particular space regarding the nitrate concentration versus the aesthetic value of the fish, especially when you're preparing for shows. If you're really a serious koi keeper, and I've done a lot of this work with Roy Pillay as well, if you're really a serious koi keeper and you're preparing fish for a show, try and get this number down to below 30.
4 in a lot of cases, yeah.
Sorry? 40? 4. What's 4?
Nitrate, down to 4.
4 ppm. Okay, all right, there's some new knowledge, okay? Typically this number will run, I mean, if you really, and I know what koi keepers do, they really feed their fish very good quality food, and typically you're always pushing them at the limit, and this number will be somewhere between, I would say, 80 and 100. Okay, and for normal people, this is fine, no problem, all right? If you're really interested in show, or maybe during the show, you want to reduce that, then you, Neville says 4, okay, I say about, yeah, somewhere below 30 is all right. Okay, then you have to work at that. Right, has that answered your question? Firstly, I verify that low concentration of nitrate for showfish and appearance is good. You want to know how to do it? Okay, so there are only 2 ways to do it. Okay, the one is this reaction that I've shown you, which uses the heterotrophs. Mind my spelling. I talk, but I don't write much. So heterotrophs is one way of doing it. The other way is through what we call plants. Okay? And when I say plants, I use it very broadly because we actually are talking about photosynthetic organisms, which is the most efficient type of photosynthetic organism you can get. Anybody? Reeds? Papyrus?
Algae.
Yeah. Algae. Why? Why do you think algae is the most efficient?
Single cell?
It's a single cell. This guy knows his stuff, eh? It's a single cell with the highest growth rate. Okay, so if you think your plant is growing very well, like those papyrus there, it's nothing compared to the algae, okay? So the most efficient method of doing this is photosynthetically, and that's what we call algae. All right. Now, Kevin specifically asked me to cover this, okay? What's the problem with algae? You're going to have very, very healthy fish.
Not good for the keeper.
Not good for who?
You can't see the fish that you
Not good for the koi keeper. All right, it's not good for the koi piece. So this is a biological system, and that beautiful piece that Kevin read, I think is something that's very simple to understand and to remember, okay, that Chris wrote. You have to understand that you're dealing with a biological system as if you cut out a piece of river and brought it into your garden. That's a beautiful analogy. What we want to do is we want to get rid of that. Heterotrophs, suspended solids, yeah? Bacteria, suspended solids. Then somebody tells me a story, let's have 0 suspended solids. Why? I don't know. Okay. Then somebody tells me, let's have no facultative zones in the pond. Everything must be aerobic. Put as much oxygen as you can. Biology doesn't work like that, guys. Koi keepers do. Okay. Biology does not work like that. You need facultative. You know what facultative is, or am I just going too technical? Okay. You get aerobic, which is what you guys love, that oxygen concentration at 5, 6 ppm if you can help it, right? Then you get anaerobic, which is the stinky stuff where you're producing sulfides, etc. And facultative is a zone where organisms can grow, heterotrophs can grow between the anaerobic and aerobic zone. You need that because this reaction is probably 10, 15 times more efficient in a facultative situation than in an aerobic situation. Any chemists here, you'll know why. You'll know why that is the case. Okay? You're taking out an oxygen molecule. Okay? So scientifically, this can actually only happen in the absence of oxygen. But these heterotrophs have the ability to do that in a facultative zone. All right, so you don't like algae. You don't like suspended solids, which are the heterotrophs. Bacterial cells are going to make suspended solids, right? They float around the thing. Tiny, tiny ones. You can't see it, but you put enough in, it'll go cloudy, right, Larry? Mm-hmm. So you don't want suspended solids. You don't want algae. But you want show quality fish with the nitrates down to 4 ppm. What are we going to do now? Put the fish back in the river. That's the best suggestion. That's the best suggestion. So the miracle of being a good koi keeper is never leave the realms of nature. Okay? There's a limit in terms of what this artificial system is meant to do. So never leave the realms of nature. Okay? You have to have some kind of balance between what is the extreme of the river, which doesn't work for you because it's muddy and dirty and it's full of algae and you can't see anything, and what is artificial. Be reasonable. You've got to be somewhere in between there. It's different when a koi keeper spends a month, 2 months preparing for a show to show those fish, etc., etc. That's a different space, okay? But day to day, you want healthy fish. You cannot leave that realm. Okay? So how would you feel if we gave you artificial feed every day and, put you in your prime, pumped up version of superhuman? I mean, you wouldn't be happy to start with, And we do that 24/10.
So in a system, it's a good thing to have some sludge, but like activated sludge.
100% correct. 100% correct.
In that is working for you. But sludge that smells is anaerobic, and that's putting toxins back into the water. So it's actually quite good to have that.
Yeah. So when it gets completely anaerobic, you're going to get hydrogen sulfide, which has a toxicity to the fish. Okay, so you don't want it to go completely anaerobic, but you definitely want these facultative zones. Okay, you definitely want these facultative zones. The other thing is, the other analogy you need to understand, but let me take more questions before I...
Raj, if I may ask, we were talking about filtration, of course, there's this discussion on drum filtration, but let's stick to the old sand filtration. The sand filtration is actually quite a dangerous filter system, but let me say that in another context. And we were talking about it last week, and that is that keeping the sand filter clean. That's where you get the likes of what you're talking about, the nitrates, and you're getting that bacteria growth. Have you seen in your sand filter, those that do have it, you've got your fins. So we all churn the sand on the top, We clean that, we look at the sand, everything is great, but if we dig right to the bottom, that's where the problem looms. And what we have found is instead of just churning it like that, closing the lid and backwashing, what I personally have found has dramatically improved a pond that does have a sand filter is by leaving the lid off, backwashing so that it overflows and churning it, and a lot of times with a high pressure hose right at the bottom, getting all that muck out. But yeah, I think that's the only way of really getting rid of that hidden bacteria at the bottom. And of course, you know, we all know how dangerous Aeromonas hydrophilia and Aeromonas sobria is.
Okay, so to put that into context, why do you have a sand filter? Anybody here has a sand filter?
Yeah.
Lots of people have sand filters? It works, right, okay?
It certainly does work, and you have to have clean water entering your biofilter.
Right? Any other reason? Okay. Yes, so a sand filter basically is a mechanical device, okay? It's built with particles of sand in this case, and there are, I think, some zeolites and some more modern technology coming across, etc. But what it is, if you look at a water treatment process, okay, of any nature, the sand filter's purpose there in a swimming pool as well is to clarify water. Okay, so the sand filter is not there to do biological activity. It ends up that way, as Kevin says, because the stuff just sits there, right? So it's to clarify water. That's why you have a sand filter. The other reason why koi keepers like sand filters is because it has the convenience of switching something around, and you can backwash and you can dump it to drain. So if you have a little, let's say, for argument's sake, a little townhouse pond, 10,000 liters or whatever, you don't want to go and dig and scratch in there. You want to turn a valve and everything must happen. Okay? Why it works is because the particle sizes of the sand distribute in such a way that you go from a coarse filtration to a very fine filtration within that system. Okay, and that's why it works for a swimming pool. A swimming pool is very nice and clean and clear, and etc. So all it's doing is it's taking out the muck, and then we're supposed to backflush that muck and throw it down to drain and let the system work again. When you start moving to a biological system, as opposed to what a swimming pool is, a sterile system for all intents and purposes, okay, that's when the drama starts, right? Okay, that's when the drama starts, because then you now got these accumulation of organics, which you don't have in a swimming pool. Swimming pool's inorganic, okay? And once you get the accumulation of organics, there's no oxygen there, there's caking taking place, it's getting blocked, all of these things. And by the way, as it gets blocked, it actually clarifies better, but hydraulic flow changes, right? So this is one of the reasons why sand filters work, but they're not preferred. Okay? This is one of the reasons why sand filters work, but they're not preferred, because maintenance is a problem, all right? The caking is a problem. The accumulation of undesirable organics is a problem, all right? For what? For water clarity. So if you want it, what do? Yes, you go to some of these new technologies like drum filtration, okay, and there's plenty more. There's ultrafiltration, okay, microfiltration. We used to, in the olden days, even use some of these irrigation particle removing filters, you know. They all are hard work. You don't turn a button and off it goes. Okay, apart from the drum filter, I think, which has nice technology, and you can do certain things like backflush it and etc. Which is, I mean, drum filter is basically a continuous strainer that you can clean, right? That's what it is. So this is the issue with sand filters. Okay, it works brilliantly, but it has two disadvantages. The one that Kevin mentioned, and the other is the hydraulic flow. Okay. So your bang for your buck in terms of power utilization to flow is going to go down as it starts to clog. Okay. All of these things you don't have with the swimming pool, but you have it with the sand filter. All right. So firstly, you have to think very carefully of whether you want a sand filter. Okay. I personally would not put one in a koi pond because I'm not crazy about clear water. I don't want my koi pond to look like my swimming pool, so I wouldn't put it in there. All right. So that's the first thing, is that do you want one or don't you want one, and why do you want one? Right? So if you really want clear water, then you must deal with all the other consequences, because there's another issue, and that is too low suspended solids is not good for koi. Too low. Too low suspended solids is an indication that the system is not natural, it's not biological, it's drifting too much to the extreme. Too low suspended solids. You obviously don't want it very high because you want a balance between nice water clarity and, but I mean, a moderate level of suspended solids is perfectly acceptable in a koi pond.
But you resolve that easily with the drum filter, Raj, by changing the screen size.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's all sorts of fancy things you can do from an engineering perspective. So you can clarify 60%, 70%, 80% of your water. Okay. But this tendency to go away from nature towards, call it bottled water, call it sterile water, call it swimming pool water for your koi, this is not good. This is not good. Okay. So, but there's lots of people there ready to sell you stuff to get you there, you know. So this is not good. I mean, at the right price, at the right cost, we don't have to have an argument about sand filters versus drum filters versus other things. You put the right amount of money in, the right amount of energy in, you can have ultra pure water. Nothing wrong. Put a microfiltration system in or an ultrafiltration system in, you're done. You can do it. You can do these things.
Now the trend is moving towards ozone.
Ozone, that's a different subject from what we're talking about, but I can tell you a little bit of what I know about ozone. All right, have I answered that question about the and comments?
One more question.
Chris is taking the question.
Sorry. The suspended solid you're talking about is organic, which is bacteria, etc., and inorganic. So there are so many of these microorganisms and bacteria in the water that you can see it as suspended solids.
And for me personally, Chris, those are the good suspended solids. They're very tiny, okay, they're very tiny, but the amount of work they do in the system, and I'm talking about, when I talk about the system, in the fish's gut, on the fish's skin, okay, in the biology, in the surfaces of the pond, in the water, free floating, okay, you only think of all the magic happening in this wonderful, expensive biological filtration stage that you've built, okay. Remember, the filter sizes have been coming down drastically from 20 years ago. Previously, Larry will tell you, we built a pond of 10 cubes, we built filtration of 10 cubes. Okay? These days you have a 100,000 liter pond and you have 10,000 liters, maybe not even 5,000 liters of filtration level. Yeah? Okay, so it's been coming down, the ratio of where you purify water to. So a lot of that's taking place in the pond itself. You take away all the suspended solids, you take away all that activity. Which is an interesting, getting back to the nitrate thing, which I forgot to mention when we were talking about it, because Kevin asked the question in my office. He said, I mean, and this algae on the wall, and I said, well, you'll be surprised how much of work that is doing towards reducing the nitrate. Okay? And I've heard horror stories of people taking this stuff out. Oh, it wouldn't grow. Kevin mentioned, I think, a system where this thing wouldn't establish, you know? And that just tells you you've gone too far away from the biology, from nature.
Raj, I think what happens is, if I may say, that we tend to move, I'm talking now from a koi health perspective, we tend to moving towards a boy in a bubble. Somebody coughs near the pond and all hell breaks loose. We must more and more look at the Japanese way of how they keep the immune system going. I mean, they've got fish for months in a mud dam. There's a reason for it. Now we can't do that, and in our ponds we can't change that. We don't want to change it. So how else do we do it? But that's when Larry's products that come through is the biocentric type product, where you've got the bio-earth, where the minerals, the natural minerals, can come back into the water. Otherwise, you're ending up with dead water, which is swimming pool water. So you want to keep building the immune system. Where does Ukumi come from? That kind of thing. I don't profess to say that Ukumi is only from an immune system perspective, but it's strongly leaning towards that. Raj is of the firm belief that it is an immune thing. It's not. Some people say that it is sunburn, but if we look at the harsh sun that our fish are exposed to, it's more, I'm leaning together with Raj on the immune side. So we have to be really, really conscious of what our fish are exposed to. And nothing, if you have that pure water, you don't have that natural element of fresh, good immune boosting. And that's when we started talking about the probiotics, to add probiotics. I'm not talking about the likes of antibiotics. I'm talking about probiotics, which you add into the water. And a lot of foods give that as well. Sorry.
We're worried designed around that for the gut.
Yes.
Also, now they also they will take them out the potting container. They don't let them touch it. A lot of breeders believe this also during feeding gets into the slime coat can interchange.
So
Different philosophies. So anything that shows the skin disease now in Japan, it won't be with the one.
So are they finding it like a secondary bacterial?
I wouldn't say that. They know it spreads though. Definitely know it spreads. It could be immune related as well. But generally you have to get it out your system because it will cross-contaminate somewhere.
okay, so this is critical, and let's not beat around the bush about it, right? Let's not beat around the bush about it. The most severe problems and the highest revenue loss on koi, okay, is with high-end koi keepers. That's not a coincidence, okay? It's not a coincidence, all right? And it should be the other way around, okay? High-end koi keepers generally buy very expensive fish, have a lot of money, okay, and should have all the technology and ability to not lose their fish, not damage their fish. But you can do any exercise, and I challenge anybody, the dealers can do that as well, okay? And look at, if you sell a fish that's worth 100,000 Rand to this koi keeper, and you sell 10 of those pieces, and you sell the other ones worth 3,000 Rand to Joe Blogg down the street, Joe Blogg comes back a year later and all his fish are fine, okay? So the revenue loss is generally with high-end koi keepers, okay? And the reason for that, okay, is because of what you're talking about, okay? The immunocompromising of the fish, okay? And you find, take another example. Where is the majority of the antibiotics used, Kevin? Joe Blogg down the road? Who are your major customers, Kevin?
Yeah, it's stopping.
Okay. So this is the situation. If you go back to the analogy of children that play in the farm soil are healthy children, okay? This is not untrue, okay? And normally the firstborns, for modern mothers, more modern mothers, the firstborns are the ones that are handled with kid gloves. Those kids have allergies, they're sick till they're 21, they don't want to leave home, all of these problems. Somebody's laughing, they're associating with me. I have one of those too, and I have a second one that's a Plaskind, who's strong as nails, okay? So this is exactly, and this has to do with immunity. So what Kevin is saying is right, and what Mike is saying is also right. So it has to do with immunity. Now this is a very interesting discussion to have, because most of your problems comes from immune attenuation, and the Japanese know that. That's why they make hikari with the probiotic. Where do you think most of your immune problems come from? Where do your inflammatory problems come from as humans? Forget about koi. The gut-blood interface. Now, we are not exposed to a water environment surrounded by all kinds of dynamic things. So for us, it's the gut-blood interface. For the fish, it's the gut-blood interface and the skin interface, because they're surrounded by water. Okay, and these two interfaces, he's talking about probiotics, he's talking about probiotics in the field, and he's telling you why the Japanese want to separate them. Okay, but the root cause, the bottom line of that, is that fish will develop those types of infections or transmissible diseases because of immune problems. Okay? If a fish is healthy, half your problems are gone. So you may have very high value livestock, and you may have a very high value system. Okay? It does not mean that your fish, okay, are less at risk than Mr. Joe down the road who has some moderate system. But if you can think about it, your fish are now this little firstborns that, go for all their vaccines and spend the first 15 years visiting the hospital to get antibiotics, and Joe down the road, his kid is the plaskend. Okay. So immunity needs to be developed. You talk about TOSA, you want to buy 1-year-old fish or 2-year-old fish or whatever the case is, okay? That fish is still young, it needs to develop immunity. You put it in a sterile system. That's why Kevin's out there every week fixing wounds and doing this and doing that and hikui and this and that. Okay, so the first thing is the general well-being and health of the fish is 2 things. Water quality, because as I say, that's the interaction of the skin with the outside world. And the other is the diet, what you put into its mouth. Okay? And both biological systems, Hikari is not stupid. Okay? Hikari is not stupid. That's why they have that probiotic there, and that's why you can get the performance. Okay? So if you have biology around the skin of your fish and you have biology inside its gut, okay, half your battle's won. Right? So if you let your kids go play in the sand and you give them good food to eat, half your battle's won. Now I can bear testament to that in that my system, I don't own a koi pond anymore, but when I used to, I think I pushed that system up to 10, 11 years without doing medical treatment. Okay? And some of my old friends will bear me out. In terms of treating fish and doing medical procedures with fish, I was probably one of the best in the country. Why?
Kept it in balance.
Exactly. Biology. And I won't quibble any bones. I'm not trying to promote anybody's product, but from my perspective, what I personally did, I fed Hikari with probiotic and I used bioactive in my pond. And I had a shitty filtration system, by the way.
A very shitty filtration.
Okay, and I never cleaned it. I never cleaned it more than once a year. And I never cleaned it more than once a year. Sorry? Sorry, Neville, you saying?
Never saw your fish,
Never saw my fish.
only when you netted them.
No. And I stopped. I mean, I think Neville's taken all of my fish since I've moved home, and I stopped even dealing with them a year before that. Okay, but I mean, I'm talking about fish here that I could take to a show and would. In fact, there are a couple of things here I've brought to give to Larry, of some of, you know. I mean, we've won prizes at the show doing that. So yeah. So
Gosh, I often get to a pond where there's boil water.
are you taking another subject now?
I'm taking another-
Okay, so we have to listen to what this gentleman had to say.
Falling tree leaves and the plant material into the float and then sinking down to the bottom. Is there any health issues on it?
Yes, they're not good. Okay, that's the type of solids and organics you don't want in your pond.
Pigeon food.
Not good. And ducks is the other one. Not good. Duck and bird poo releases ammonia at a very rapid rate. Okay, so those are not good. What happens there is you end up with effectively detritus, rotting stuff. Okay, and that's why we always we have skimmers and we have these things to pull out all the coarse material, because when we talk about suspended solids, we're really talking about microscopic things that the eye can't see on its own. Okay, but in collection it will give some kind of turbidity. There's a microscope expert here, he'll bear me out on what I'm talking about. But you'll find that bacteria you'll probably run at about 10,000 times to 1,000 times on the microscope to see them nicely. And we're talking about that. You're not going to see it with the naked eye, but if you put enough in it, it'll have a slightly turbid, you know, light soupy type of appearance. That kind of suspended solids, I believe, is quite good. Okay, but having junk rotting in the pond is not good. Yeah.
Has to be sort of every week or so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your hydrogen sulfide poisoning comes from.
Yeah, that's where you're going to get hydrogen sulfide, because that's detritus that's going to rot. And also, a lot of protozoans are attracted to that kind of rotting stuff. Okay, so yet again, protozoans are not terribly bad for koi, okay? Not even all of them. We saw that picture that you brought the other day. Not all of them are terribly bad. But with a weak immune system and a high protozoan load on the outside of the fish, they will start to cause some problems. And that's that balance again. If you have a very dirty pond, then expect to get some of these problems on the skin of your fish, because you're going to have a high protozoan and parasite load. Okay, so I'm not saying dirty, but I'm not saying pristine either. Oh, incredibly clean. And it's always a good idea not to let the stuff get to the bottom in the first place. And that's why we try to install more than one skimmer on a koi system, so that you actually take the stuff as it arrives. Sure. Other questions before Kevin bangs another one?
I give another one.
Surely NO3 will also be reduced by water changes?
Yeah, everything gets reduced by water changes because it's simply that in your mind you can just keep the thing is that dilution is the solution to pollution. I mean, okay, so everything if you do a 10% water change, everything will drop by 10%. But
How much do you recommend a month on water changes?
It depends on your filtration.
depends on your availability of water, I would think these days. But you
20% a week?
you got an answer?
Well, yeah, with the drum filter you can reduce your water changes to, I'd reckon about 5% a week.
5%
Easily.
Okay. So I never used to do much in my pond because I think it had a little leak, and but I never did it deliberately. Yeah. The main reason for water changes and why they are important is because you're going to get a certain level of heavy metal accumulation in your pond. Okay, and that's the bigger problem. And then I know the Japanese talk a lot about if you have males and females in the same pond, you get this hormone repression of growth. So this is another reason why the only way you can do that is by having a certain level of dilution. So I fully support a freshwater purge, and I think maybe 10% a week or something like that is a good ballpark number to work with. But these days, water is a problem. So
Maybe can I just mention something, Lyle, because that whole what you were saying now was also concerning me, and what we have the fortunate here to have boil water back, but saying that the whole house and everything is built on sustainability. So what I've done here, some of the water here which flows over goes into a secondary dam down there, which we then use to irrigate.
100%.
That gets used to irrigate the gardens. And then that dam can also be used as a hydroponic system for vegetables, which we will be connecting. So my whole thinking here was that if you have a very slight overflow, very slight, that will equate to your percentage, whatever, that water gets reused again.
that's a brilliant way to do it.
Sorry, I'm coming out completely from the side.
That's a brilliant way to do it.
Then we're going to use this for irrigation, and
Yeah.
so that's what we've got.
That's a brilliant way to do it.
All the excess storm water also goes down there, and so we actually pump out of that dam then to spare the oil.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the reasons why you have to start thinking this clever sustainability thinking, is because water supply is a problem. And also remember that if you're going to dose your pond every week with malachite green or heavy metals or treatments, you can't actually do that in a nice way. Okay, so it's got to be there, and that's where Kevin and I had a long discussion about what is chronic and what is acute. Okay, and for koi keepers, there's no difference. All right, acute treatments are actually good. Okay, they save your fish from harm, etc., etc. But most koi keepers think acute treatments are chronic. So you hear the stories about, no, I malachite malachite green my pond once every 3 months, and somebody else will tell you I do this. Someone will tell you, no, we just throw in a bit of chloramine tea every week, and these are horror stories. Okay, you do not treat a fish. You do not treat a fish, and thanks for having people like Kevin and Neville and Mariana and these people that go out and help other people. You do not treat a fish if you don't know what's wrong with it. This is not taking your child to a doctor and saying, oh, okay, maybe you've got the flu. Here's a set of antibiotics. Bye-bye. Okay? This is not the way it works. Get the diagnostics right. Get the diagnostics right. If you don't know what you're treating, what did I say, Kevin? It's acute. The poor guy's going to lose $1 million or 2 million rand worth of fish in 3 days. Kevin's got to take his chances. Okay? Now, where the problem comes in is something comes right. Then a guy doesn't phone Kevin or Neville for 3-4 weeks. Okay? So they get forced into what? They get forced into chronic as opposed to acute. It did you an acute treatment, okay? Get him to come back. He saved your fish. Get him to come back and figure out what really went wrong with him. Because he was doing the ER part, not the treatment part. Okay, and understand there's a difference there. And the last thing you must do is, oh, Kevin threw in some chloramine tea that day. Okay, I'll just do it every week and then My problem solved. That's the worst thing you can do. You develop antibiotic resistant, you're going to call Kevin and he's going to run an antibiogram and he's not going to be able to find an antibiotic to sort your fish out. And I've run hundreds of these antibiograms and I've been through many, not all, but many cycles of this doesn't work this year for Costia and this doesn't work for this bacterial disease, and I've had to use some kinds of drugs to save fish that are theater drugs, that are, drugs that are not even available to you guys. And why? Because of that practice. You remember the olden days? Hey, antibiotic containing food was a thing, like you could just go down to, I don't know, some Centon Aquatics or whatever and buy a bag and you sorted. Okay? It'll come back to hurt you.
Very interesting that I've lately come across resistant flux.
Yeah. And Costia, I mean.
And flux is normally easy to kill.
Sorry. Is too much oxygen a problem?
Yes. And it's not actually the oxygen concentration, it's the way koi keepers put the oxygen into the pond. Okay, so we try to to get the oxygen concentration up, okay, you try to make very fine bubbles, all right, and then what happens is you make the bubbles so small, and you generally try to do that mechanically, okay, and you end up with gas bubble disease. So you don't want...
And cascading?
That's right, eh?
Waterfall?
No, that shouldn't be a problem. Those are fine, yeah. Those are fine, and you can run as high as you possibly can, but it's more about try not to make too tiny bubbles. Okay. There's another safe way, which is in the extreme, where you actually solubilize the bubble into the liquid. Okay, and that's called a technology called perfusion. Okay, where you put high concentration oxygen against a membrane, and it actually doesn't form a bubble; it just goes boom in there. Okay, other one Neville's talking about is ozonation. Okay, where you can put an O3 molecule and pick up the oxygen concentration. So this can be done, but the one thing you don't want to do, I think they do it in the tilapia industry and a couple of other places where they mechanically force oxygen into the water, and sometimes you have a very deep pond with very deep floor or drains or whatever, and you tend to have some kind of fine bubble diffuser, and because of the pressure down there and the diffusion of bubbles, you can get very tiny bubbles, and then you can get gas bubble disease. So
The pressure of the bubble is higher because of the thinner.
correct.
Raj, can I?
Sorry, another one, wetland.
Wetlands.
If you use a wetland to filtration.
Wetlands are like having a part of your pond where you can have reeds and stuff like that. Now the big problem or why wetlands work in nature and they don't work so well in a contained reticulated system is exactly the sulfide buildup and the pathogen buildup and things like that. So I would say a little bit is not too bad, okay, but don't go overboard in terms of, unless you've got a completely extraneous system, and you've got wild carp in there or fish that have developed really solid resistance. Koi is quite a hybrid. So don't go too far in having like a bog garden and a complete, system.
Yeah, with the pots or plants here on this floor here, it's got a...
It's okay, yeah, and I see it's lifted off the floor. And I mean, look, if you want to be more picky, maybe you can use some kind of other type of aggregate and use plants that really only need the nitrates and phosphates as opposed to the other stuff that's in the soil, and maybe just a little bit of micronutrients, and your plant should still grow without having the sludge and the hydrogen potential for anaerobic and hydrogen sulfide production. So there are tricks to do that, yeah.
Protein schemas.
Right? So I'm not an expert in them, but I never kind of figured out why. I know they work, so, but I've never figured out. I've seen them work, so I know all this foam's pumping out the top of the thing, etc. But I've never figured out. I think they're great because you got a head of water and you put air in there, and then the oxygenated water is hitting the pond back, and as a bonus, you get some foam coming out, which sounds great. But I still don't understand why is there high protein in the pond. I mean, because one of the downsides of protein skimmers is they tend to what we call flocculate, okay? Because of the oxygen molecule hitting those suspended solids, they tend to flocculate out the biology. And now that's the only explanation for me why you can get protein out of the system. So you're actually lysing bacterial and algal cells to actually get the protein, because if you feed the thing protein, you should be getting the ammonia, not not wax of protein unless you're feeding a very, very poor digestible food, which I don't think koi keepers do, you know. And unless you really are feeding it like hectically like a chicken farmer, I mean, I don't see why you should have very high concentrations of protein in the water. Okay, or unless somebody's like pulling out all that slime or whatever the case is. So I don't know if anybody else knows why you have high concentrations of protein in the water.
You had a couple of dead koi at the bottom.
Dead cod in bottom or something like that. Yeah, it's really weird. You shouldn't have high concentrations of protein. And think about it, if you've got a good biofilter, what is it that those heterotrophs are going to take first? Sugars and protein, boom, gone. Within 4 hours, that protein is down to zero. So why?
Back to shower on and there will be nothing in your protein schema.
Is this what your experience is? So I think it makes sense. The device is kind of nice because, I mean, you can get this air trapped in a column, which will give you a bit of better solubility, but I never figured out what they were there for.
They are being phased out anyway.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's your answer. Practically as well, it doesn't seem like it could have been a fad or, you know.
I think it's technology brought out different salt water where you are. You have to, but I also tend to agree. I think they just look pretty. I don't think it's...
I see a lot of brilliant ponds that doesn't have protein schemas on.
Yeah. And I think the unseen potential detriment is that they will actually flocculate out the good suspended solids, which is the biology, you know. The bacteria that are supposed to be there, they will flocculate. That's the only explanation I can have for the form.
They use it in the agricultural industry with O3 to keep the parasite levels down as well.
Okay.
It's not binding units.
Yeah, but that's more for the head and the contact time rather than actually taking out that protein. Yeah.
Pump it into the channel and water sterilized.
Yeah.
from that.
That I mean, if it's for that purpose, it's all right, I think. But it's not really a protein schema then. It's more a contactor. Yeah.